Okay, hello everyone. Greetings tonight here on Horror Hangouts, episode 10, season 2, here on the Big Slick Adventures channel. I'm Josh, and tonight I have my guest tonight is a filmmaker and writer, cinematographer, I believe, as well, and that's Matt Schmidt. How are you doing, Matt, tonight?
I'm good, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Glad to have you on. Now, you, of course, have been doing some films, most recently The Sandman, which came out last year, and where you can find on TUBI. You can also rent it on Prime Video as well. But let's go back further. Obviously, that's a horror movie. So what got you, where'd your love of horror movies start? Can you pinpoint where that all started at? Which movie or books?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just generalize it. I have a love for movies in general. It's my absolute favorite art form. So I love pretty much all genres. Horror just happens to be one of my favorite genres for sure. And I think I'm gonna say my love started for it was probably when my older brother, and my older cousin sat me down with the original NBC broadcast of the first broadcast of Halloween. So I believe we're talking 81. So yes, I'm showing my age, but that's okay.
I'm a little older. I remember that broadcast.
So it's funny because they showed it to me at night, of course, and then of course they were taunting me the next day about how scared I was, and I kept saying to them, "Well, it's okay, it's daytime. I'm okay now." They're like, "No, no, no! Don't you remember? He was out and about during the day too." And I'm like, "Great." So it was this weird horror, especially when you're younger, gives you this it's almost like a roller coaster. You're terrified of it, but the rush you get is so addictive. So it's like you want more of it. And I think that's what really kicked off my love of horror. Would probably be the original Halloween, and probably because it was force fed to me when my parents were out and my brother and my cousin took advantage of the situation. So it's something. I like movies that hit primal chords, and horror is such a good genre to pick at those primal chords, to pick at things that are just affect all humans, because there's plenty of people who don't like horror, but at the same time most of the people who don't like it are scared of it, so it's still an effective genre even if you don't enjoy being scared.
Oh yeah.
Or if you're someone like me who's almost desensitized to the whole genre, but just enjoy it for what I could tell it's doing effectively. It's the other end of the spectrum. But either way, it's amazing the visceral reactions you get out of audiences and out of people with horror. It's just amazing to me. And I love the fact that there are so many subgenres within horror that just hit on so many things. I mean, you have found footage, you have paranormal, you have slasher, and the list goes on and on. So it's just such a fascinating genre in that way. I think it's similar to comedy for me in that way, that it has so many great subgenres to it, and all can be effective if done correctly.
Yeah, and horror and comedy use in a lot of ways the same progressions to get to where they're going. Like with comedy, you have a build up to the joke.
Right.
You see that in stand up a lot, but you see it in movies too. You have a couple little scenes that build up to the big joke, and in horror does a similar progression where you have a few build ups to the scare or to the kill or whatever it's trying to do. But you're right, horror really will hit you several different sensations all at once. And yeah, there's so many subgenres. If I just looked at my favorite top 4 or 5 favorite, there's probably about 3 or 4 different subgenres listed right there in the top 5, or so there's just so much. There's something for everybody, and even people who don't like horror can still probably find a few horror movies that they like. Everyone by and large likes Jaws.
Right.
A lot of people like, and that's kind of debatable whether it's horror or not. I think it's horror. Same thing with Silence of the Lambs is another example too. But yeah, definitely.
Perfect example, actually. You brought up 2 perfect examples, because yes, Jaws is debated whether it's a summer blockbuster or a horror movie. My argument has always been it's definitely a horror movie, but I could see where people get it wrapped up in the summer blockbuster genre. But that is a Hitchcock inspired movie through and through. A lot of the stuff Spielberg uses, you could tell very much is Hitchcock influenced, which goes to your other point. When you say the buildup between horror and comedy, the buildup of a joke or the buildup of a scare. Well, that's what Hitchcock said. He said the horror is in the buildup. The scare is just to let you know the threat is real, but the buildup is where the fear is built. And I think, it's similar in comedy. The punchline makes you laugh, but it's like without the setup, the punchline is essentially flat. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. If like, I always think one of my favorite scenes in Blazing Saddles is when Gene Wilder is talking to Cleavon Little after Cleavon Little had a, shall we say, not so good experience trying to meet the people, and he does a slow build up. What did you expect? Marry my daughter, all this stuff. You got to remember, and then he goes, morons, and that wouldn't have been as funny as just the way he built that up. But yeah, you're right too. With I was like thinking too with the Terminator, the first Terminator movie. I've always contended, that's very much a slasher film. It has all the different build up and progressions of your typical of Halloween. And I have to think, did Cameron watch a lot of Halloween or Friday the 13th before making Terminator? Because just the way that whole movie plays out feels very much like a slasher film.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And obviously Cameron came from, a horror background, if you will, with Piranha 2, with The Spawning. So, but Terminator. The producer on Sandman and my frequent collaborator Brandon Berkeley has said, from the jump, Terminator's a slasher film through and through, and I see it. Except he just tends to use guns instead of knives. But it's that in comparing them to Michael Myers, they are both what Christopher Nolan likes to call absolutes. They can't be reasoned with, negotiated with. They're going straight towards their goal. In the Terminator's case, a man of few words. In Michael Myers' case, no words. But it's like, that this is a nightmare scenario because it cannot be. There's no negotiating with something like that. So
right.
It's very much a Jason, a Michael, very much a slasher film.
Absolutely.
Hidden as a sci-fi action movie.
It is. Now, the sequels, I would not really, there could be some small horror elements to them, but by and large, those are certainly sci-fi action films. The first one being a little bit more grounded, I think, but yeah, for
Agreed.
Sure. Yeah. So where did your passion for filmmaking start? When did you decide this is what I want to do? I imagine it came from your passion from watching movies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I get into a debate with my friends sometimes about understanding languages. And I don't mean spoken languages, but languages of art. So I love music. I love music. I know what I like. I know what sounds good. I know what works. But I can't speak that language. I don't have whatever it is you need in you to be a musician. I know, chorus, bridge, climax, finale. I get that, but it doesn't, when I try to even write lyrics, I'm just at an impasse. Whereas the language of film, knowing what shot goes where, knowing what sequence of events should be like, you know, in a screenplay, knowing how to not, use too much on the nose dialogue and over explain, and letting the visual medium tell the story. I'm not going to say I knew it right from the jump. It took practice like anything else, but it's just something that came more natural to me. So when I think we're born with somewhat natural inclinations to pursue what we love. And I just felt like the language of filmmaking, I understood by watching certain things, by growing up following certain directors, watching how they organize their shots, watching how the dialogue plays out. And I think it was such a passion for me that I'm like, you know what? I just feel I have stories to tell. And when the technology became more accessible to your average Joe like me, instead of someone who's dialed in and connected with the Hollywood machine, I was just like, I got to take advantage, and I got to at least try and see if I understand the language as good as I think I do. And to try to put out, like, some decent product. And it started out rough, as any beginner would be. And I just, from fan reaction, I'll never judge my own opinion on myself, but from fan reaction, it seems that I'm getting progressively better at telling these stories in visual light. So it's addictive because you're telling things you want to see, and people are actually responding in a positive way. So, I mean, it's very, it's very encouraging.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, well, brings us to now, Mr. Sandman, your recent movie that you made. What inspired you to make Mr. Sandman?
Mr. Sandman actually came from my desire to tap into the primal, like horror movies do. And what's more primal than the fear of the dark?
Right.
I mean, you can't get more basic, more relatable. I'm like, okay, so I have the fear of the dark. Let me make it more relatable. A child's fear of the dark, because it just enhances the whole thing, because children have a much more vivid imagination than adults who have been jaded by life and realize that there's no boogeyman and no Santa Claus and what have you. The magic is somewhat gone, and you've been jaded by, working 9 to 5 or whatever. Reality, just that awful word reality, just like weights on your shoulders and takes all like the magic away from life. But when you're a kid, anything could be in that dark, and no one can tell you different. There could be a werewolf in there. There could be a vampire in there. And it's just your imagination will put those things in there. But I'll tell you, it's so funny, because I'm 50 years old now, and I'll tell you, I cannot sleep in a bedroom
51.
with the door open. Because if I look in a hallway,
oh really?
At this age, I will see things. I need a door shut when I sleep. I cannot have that open visual into the dark. So as a kid, it was so much more enhanced. So I just knew that with Sandman, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to really play on this children's fear of the dark, I knew it would be a universal, relatable theme, because no matter, your gender, your culture, whatever, it's a primal fear. Therefore, it's human. Therefore, it's not influenced by those things, gender and culture. So it started with a simple idea, and I'm like, okay, I want to make something where you're afraid of the dark, but I'm like, but I want to put an actual threat in the dark and make it not just the kid's imagination. So that's kind of where it spawned off of. And I was like, if nothing else, it's still up to me to execute this properly. But if nothing else, I know I have a relatable topic that should strike a chord with most people.
Yeah, I think also always putting the point of view character as a child always really does enhance the horror. There's a reason why the children's portion of it always works better than the adult version. It's just more scarier when you're watching this from the lens of a child than you are an adult. That's why that part, whether it's the miniseries or the movies, always seems that part's always been the better part, and really the same in the book as well too. So that can always be an effective thing, using a child as your point of view character.
Well, there's an innocence to children, and it's just, again, like I said, not weighted down by reality. And it's, it's the same reason, if you want to jump genres, E.T. is so effective. If an adult found E.T., he would probably be like, okay, well, I'm not going to fight the government. Here you go. Just hand it over. But it's a kid. He falls in love with E.T., attached to it, and he'll protect it with you at all costs, And I think, again, with movies, because I grew up on those like Spielbergian type 80s movies with these big swells and this light, looking at everything through a child and just the wonderment of everything. I just think when you make something through a child's eye, it just adds such an element, because even though you and I are not children anymore, we were children at one time. So if we're not experiencing those same fears of the dark today, if you're looking at a movie like Mr. Sandman, you can at least say, well, I definitely remember what that was like, and I think that just adds to it.
Not only do we remember that we used to be children, oftentimes we have children. And speaking of that, the main character in your movie is played by your daughter. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
So how did that come about?
She loves acting. She does. So this was not. She did have a smaller part in my first outing, my found footage film, Happy Birthday, Hannah. And she does like a lot of the school plays and stuff. She loves performing. So not only did I know she'd be able to pull off what I needed her to do, but when you're working with your own daughter, you don't have to worry about a parent over your shoulder saying, like, oh, she can't do that, or I'm not letting my daughter do that, or whatever the case may be. So it just made it, I don't want to say easier, because there's a whole list of problems that comes along with this as far as scheduling and school nights and shooting at night. But at least that one obstacle of working with your own daughter and knowing how much you can push your own daughter's limits made that easier without having to worry about an outside voice. But so all in all, it was good, challenging, but good. And she's very proud of it, and she's very happy with the product.
Excellent. That's awesome too. So make it now, as far as there really isn't much of a cast there. You have her and her parents. How did you cast the parents in that movie?
Well, the mother I had worked with before on another one of my previous found footage films. It was called Tales of Found Footage. And I loved her audition for that movie so much. And I know that she was the type of person, I'm referring to Mackenzie Newberry, who played Mom. She's the type of person that I had a rapport with, and a language where I could just explain what I needed out of her, and she instantly got it. So there was a comfort level of working with someone you worked with before, where they already understand the way you work and your language and the way you try to communicate, that I knew she had talent, because she's done a ton of off-Broadway stuff, and she's actually really phenomenal at it. But I just knew there was just that comfort level, and I was like, you know what? I need someone to play that character who really genuinely cares about the main character, Zoe, and who can portray that lovingness. And she just, it's not something you're going to pick up on in the film, but I just felt she came across so naturally that it's more in your subconscious, like, yes, I believe her as Mom. And then, of course, when we had her do her, without spoilers, her scare segment, I knew she could pull that off too. So I was confident in her. As far as Grandma is concerned, this is my first time working with Sherry Hoffman. I found her through an audition, and she just knocked the monologue out of the park during the audition. She was heads and tails above anyone else as far as that monologue, because that's what we used to audition the grandmas. And I was like, you're my grandma. You know, you nailed it. You got the tone, you got the pacing. It was just perfection. But speaking of the cast, we do actually have a quick guest.
Oh, look who's there.
Say hello to Josh.
Hi.
Hi. You're now like the second actress I've had on here now. So
How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
We were just talking about you and your performance and what have you. So
yeah, you're a real pro. You did really good on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So casting was just, it was just something that I gotta say, worked out really well. And I was really happy with everything. And then I just had my producer Brandon Berkeley play Dad, and I'm like, all you have to do is roll over and grunt, and you're fine. So he did that.
Not any dad can do that. So
Any dad,
we do that every night anyway.
Just pretend you're at home and you're annoyed and you're trying to get to sleep and you're good. So that was a simple task for him. But yeah, so that was the flow of the casting.
Here's one question. One thing that your movie did really, really well, and a movie like this kind of has to have this, is it had a lot of tension, a lot of atmosphere, and very claustrophobic. How do you, as a director, how are you able to convey that on screen? Because I can't imagine that's very easy.
That is definitely from planning, from shot planning. This is the first time because, like I said, previously I'd only done found footage style. But my heart is, like I said before, more in cinematic style and shots and everything. Right. So I just made sure that when I was shot planning, I was planning shots that would give you that feel of isolation for Zoe's character and correct shadowing where we could to just convey that feeling. I really wanted her to feel alone through this journey and alone at night, even though her parents were, supposed to be one room over. Right. I wanted her to feel like she was going through this journey alone. So a lot of close-ups to, make it seem like it's just her and she's filling the frame. So your mind is only with her. You very rarely see outside of her room or the door leading into the parents' bedroom, because I really wanted to close her off in that sense and make it her journey and her journey alone. And I think, I never thought about the word claustrophobic, but I'm glad it landed that way, because it's another feeling of alone and isolated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that always adds to it. And some of the best horror movies have that element of claustrophobia in it, because that, for one, is like kind of like a little fear of my own. So that always will resonate with me. Chloe, were you ever scared while doing any of these scenes?
I mean, not really, because I'm really familiar with making movies and my environment, because I've done film with my dad before, but I was very young, but I still understood the whole concept of everything. And this is my second time of filming in my house, so I am really comfortable with how he wants his movies and how he plans them out and what genre he's going for and what scenery he's going for. But I never really got scared because they're all people that I'm really familiar and close to with. And they're all really nice. But sometimes looks can be a little scary, yes, I'll admit it. But I know that in real life they're really nice. And I always when I was watching the challenge, Delaney who played.
He may not have seen the challenge.
Oh, oops.
I will put it on my
No,
watch
sure.
list, though.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in the challenge, Delaney, I was familiar with her in real life, but she was really scary in the movie. So I did start to cry. I went to my dad, but he informed me that it was just Delaney, and I got over it. But they're all people that they're friendly to me. I love them so much. They're basically a part of my family and this whole atmosphere that I have with acting. And I do want to continue it if I ever got the chance. But yeah, it's so not that scary, honestly.
Yeah, I don't imagine it would be, especially if it's right there in your own house. So that's one thing, you got to save some money from having to rent out a studio or something like that. Just do it right there in the comfort of your own home. Almost like making a home video almost.
It is. But I think with all, even like with most horror movies, if you see like, there's that famous shots of like behind the scenes on like the Nightmare on Elm Streets where like the cast is like hugging Freddy and all around them and joking around. And even part 3 when she's getting eaten by the giant Freddy worm, she's like laughing. So, I think with the stop and go of movies and like, it's not like and you're not alone. There's people right in front of your face with lights and everything. I just think it takes the fear element right out of it, for the actors, obviously.
Oh yeah, I imagine. I've often heard from seeing interviews with actors that have worked in the genre. They say it can get pretty crazy behind the scenes or between shoots. They're normally joking around or playing gags on one another. So maybe that's like the same in most movies. I don't know as far as other genres go, but I think especially in horror, I can imagine that being the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it is a fun genre, and I mean, we are going for a roller coaster ride. We're scared, but it's that roller coaster feel. You're scared, but you're safe because you're watching it on a screen. So it's that same exhilaration.
Excellent. So, did you have like any directors that you, whether it's in the horror genre or outside the genre, that you really, I guess, I don't know if I want to say idolized, but certainly inspired you, or that you really, or just happen to be your favorite directors that you really love their work and maybe somehow reflects on your work?
Yeah, 110%. It's my work, if you look at it, and I say this a lot, but it doesn't make it any less true. George Lucas famously said, don't worry about like what other people have done, and that you're copying it because it hasn't been done by you. So don't stress that stuff. So I was directly inspired by, Spielberg / Tobe Hooper with Poltergeist in this. There's a lot of influence you can see directly in it. I was inspired by Sam Raimi with The Evil Dead in this. There's influence that's very, obvious. And some of my shots were very much inspired by Kubrick, who obviously I'm just a huge fan of. Not just with The Shining, but like a lot of his stuff is creepy even when it's not a horror movie. So he just has like that way with those slow dolly ins that I used a couple times in this film, like stuff like that. So that era of filmmaking from mid 70s to mid 80s will always be an influence on me, and I will always be like, okay, I want to evoke this emotion on this scene. Well, how do I do that? So I'll think back to my favorite shot of one of the horror movies I love or something like that, and I'll be like, well, I'm just going to use that shot, and it just works, so if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I have no qualms about admitting that I'm very much inspired by these, great guys.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that was a really great era for directors that came out in all genres, whether it was Carpenter or if it was George Lucas or Coppola or Craven, all those guys, Argento, another one. And yeah, that was a terrific time period of directors that came out. I think we're getting another kind of like another wave of directors coming out probably in the last, whatever, 15 years or so, with guys like Robert Eggers, Ty West, and so forth. There's plenty of others that I'm probably forgetting, Jordan Peele. So,
Yeah,
for
I would
sure.
throw Ari Aster, and Mike Flanagan in there too. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely some very cool filmmakers coming out, and I would say Ari Aster very much is Kubrick inspired. Very much Kubrick inspired.
I certainly see that in Midsummer for sure.
Yeah. So, it's just, again, if greatness is out there, I think there's nothing wrong with admiring it and paying tribute to it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, there's only so many different new things you can do with the horror genre that eventually you do. And like I said, not necessarily copying, but doing your own take on something, certainly is like the Terrifier movies really doing anything any different? Maybe a little messier, but basically the whole progressions are kind of the same of any other slasher film for the most part.
I mean, yeah, and we've obviously had a long list of white-faced silent slasher characters, and Art is another one, but he put a little more of a different twist on it. He decided him to be a little more of a taunter and a little more play with his victims and stuff like that. So he took what already was, and obviously we're talking about Damien. He took what already existed, but took it to a new, a different twist. So it's like, have we had the killer whiteface before? Of course we have. Have we had killer clowns before? Of course we have. But has there necessarily been this specific combination?
Right.
No. So it took what already was. He was clearly inspired and just took it to a different direction, obviously to great success. So, hey, good for him.
Well, yeah, and even and this is like a different type of slasher film, but if you look at Ty West's recent trilogy that he did, you look back towards X, on the surface, that feels like a very Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired film a little bit, with just the way it's shot, the way it looks. But he put something different in it, made it a little bit more, I guess, character based, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, once again, it's someone you can tell was heavily influenced. And I know he's influenced big time by 80s movies, because about all of his movies take place in the 80s or late 70s almost, except for Pearl being like maybe the exception. But yeah, so like I said, the 80s are influenced people in the 2000s, and 20 years from now, people will be influenced by some of the stuff that's come out recently, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would also say that Zombie is very much influenced by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He seems to love to put that feel into all his films. So he's very much influenced by that. So
that is like almost like a combination of that and the Universal monster movies or something like that. Those seem to be his two favorite things, and I'm kind of a fan of most of his movies anyway. So I like that. Some people say, well, it's going too much into nostalgia. Well, you could say the same thing about Nosferatu in a way, and that was an excellent film. So there's always going to be a little bit of nostalgia out there, and those seem to always work best. Of course, I'm a sucker for period pieces anyway, so.
Understood.
So, yeah. So, what was probably, I'll say this, here's a two-part question. What's the most difficult thing about making a movie, and what's the most rewarding part about making a movie? And this could go to both of you, I guess.
Do you want to take the difficult part?
Sure. Okay. Okay. So at first you need to know what character you're trying to represent. So I would definitely recommend watching other movies that have that same genre that your director is making, so that you can get inspiration and that you can actually like feel and represent and play your character even better than you did before. But you also have to be comfortable with what you're doing, be and be like proud about it. But difficulty with on set, I mean, we really haven't used that many like machines but the only thing would be time, because timing for scenes and timing to shot the scenes. So on most nights during this film, it was weeknights. So timing, I had school in the morning, I had swim practice, and most nights we would be up until 11, 12, like a.m. And everybody had something to do, but we made it work. And in the end, it all like came together, and I really liked it. But it would definitely be timing and timing on your shots, because like you can't have light too dark, you can't have this light too bright. And it was mainly the lighting, because we would spend like 30 minutes on trying to get this lighting for shots. And it's also difficulty because we don't have a lot of equipment. We're in our house with very little supplies. So for certain scenes, we did have to use like green screen, and even carrying. Like my dad carried me when I levitated in a green screen suit. So we don't have
The spoiler.
Oh, he didn't watch it?
No, he's watched it.
Oh.
I've watched it.
There's some people.
Sorry, guys. But,
you can tell who the actress is and who the director is.
Yeah. But along with that, it goes like a lot of detail that goes into the scene, but it eventually does end up great.
Yeah, scheduling was by far the hardest thing, because like she said, she has school, she's a competitive swimmer. We only had like nighttime hours to shoot. You get an extra hour or two during the winter, but then when daylight savings time kicks in, you lose that hour.
Right.
She had an accident unrelated to the film where she broke her arm, so that stopped filming for 6 months. So things come up in life, schedule, and plus when you live in a house, not just her obviously, but my wife, my other daughter, getting that quiet time to film, scheduling, you're disrupting everyone's life.
Yeah.
And so scheduling and timing was by far the biggest challenge. The most rewarding has been easily the response to the film. And seeing the different reviewers and different podcasters have the same, what my friend likes to call consensus reaction. Like, this part about it worked, this part about it worked, this part about it worked. Not to blow her head up too much, but she's gotten pretty much universal praise for this. So, sorry, keep your ego in check. So I just think that the reward is definitely the response to the film. Obviously, you enjoyed it, or you'd have no interest in talking to us. So that's been the reward for sure, is knowing when you put something out there that's actually effective, and people are enjoying it. It really is a high. It really is a good feeling.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, that had to have been really fun thing. Now that movie's made under the banner of Acres Film, if I'm pronouncing that right. Is that the company that you yourself started?
Yep, I grew up in an apartment complex called Larchmont Acres, where I spent my formative years, and I just I didn't want to call it Matt's Spooky Films or something so on the nose. I just wanted it to be Acres Films, and also to leave it open in case I decided to try a different genre as well. So, yep, Acres Films was inspired by where I grew up and where my love for cinema really blossomed.
Cool. That's cool. You use something from way back when you're growing up, turning it into your pretty much into your name of your profession. I was wondering, and I'm sure if there's any other indie or startup filmmakers, I'm sure would probably like to know this question too, and maybe just the fans too. How does the process start as far as you getting your movie distributed, getting it on streaming? Did you just, I don't know, call up Tubi, goes, hey, I got a movie, you want to put it on? Or how's that whole process even works? Or how does that even start? Because I imagine it's a long process.
This is the first, well, initially when I put out my first two films, I don't know if this is still the case. You used to be able to go directly to Amazon Prime and submit it to them. If they accepted it, they would put it on. This is my first time working with a distributor. So I submitted my film to Film Hub, and they're the ones who have put it on Amazon Prime and Tubi, and I think it was on Fossum for a little while. I know that's a little bit of a lesser known streaming service. So they pretty much control it now. But Tubi is something I don't think you can go directly to. I think you do need a distributor to go to Tubi. So if you are, a first time or newer filmmaker, I would look into either Film Hub or one of the other ones out there, just to see, what your best option is. But for Tubi, you definitely need a distributor. They will not accept direct submissions.
Okay, well, that's good to know, information for everyone out there that's looking to make their first film or get one shown on out on TV or so forth. That's something we did not have growing up, was like being able to submit a movie to streaming. I'm guessing now, you think it's easier now for independent filmmakers to get their movies out, available for viewing, than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago?
110%. I think I touched on it earlier that the technology is more accessible to people now. You don't need a big studio camera anymore to make, a decent looking film. It's amazing the technology we have now, because when I was editing it, I'm using a program called Final Cut Pro, and that's almost studio grade editing level, so it's like, it's just amazing to me what's available to us, not just the tools to film make, but the tools to distribute. I mean, to think that, when I first saw my first film make it to Amazon Prime, I was like, wow, it's actually possible. You can get on a major streaming service, and now Tubi has exploded in recent years. It's very impressive to me that people can do this now. It's absolutely easier to get your stuff out there now. But unfortunately, it's not easier to make something good. You still have to be a good storyteller. You still have to be a good visualist, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's, and again, I'm going to throw myself in here too, so people don't think I'm being cocky. My first two outings, they got better as I went along, but it started out pretty rough, and I had to learn my lessons too. So the only other thing I would definitely say to filmmakers is, don't get discouraged. Learn your lessons and just make sure you progress in your next film.
Very good, very good. So, what other, you mentioned, you're also a fan of comedy. We've talked about how comedy and horror have the same progressions. Would you ever be interested in doing, say, a horror comedy? Is that something that could be in the future?
Absolutely. I have several ideas, not just horror comedy, just all different types of directions, that I'm exploring currently with my producer about what direction we would like to go in next. But one of them is absolutely a horror comedy, and I would love to touch on that genre. And one of them is even a straight comedy without any horror elements. And I wouldn't shy away from that, touching that either. I love horror comedies. I love Army of Darkness is one of my favorite films. I love to laugh and be scared, and I want to go on a roller coaster. I do. I want to enjoy everything. I mean, Scream, you wouldn't call it a horror comedy, but I would call it a very self-aware horror movie, and it played on those tropes so well that I remember seeing in the theater. It was one of my favorite theater experiences because the audience was all in on the joke. You know, the second Nev Campbell, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything for anyone at this point, gets off the phone when she says, "Oh no, you know, those movies are so insulting. She should be running out the front door, not up the stairs. What's wrong with her?" Second, she gets off the phone and the killer attacks. What's the first thing she does is run up the front stairs. The whole audience burst out in laughter, like right at the perfect time. And I'm just like, man, they nailed it with this one. They just absolutely nailed it. So it was scary because the opening scene was like, oh my God, this is intense. But they threw in so many laughs in it. And again, I wouldn't call it a horror comedy, but man, it had some great comedic moments and just made such for a great film.
One of my favorite horror comedies is probably might be one of the first ones that were ever made was because I grew up first watching the old Universal monster movies, but Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein. I think that was one of my first favorite horror comedies, but that was always like a good little treat to watch.
Yeah. My father was such a huge Abbott and Costello fan. So he showed me that, and I love that movie. It was the first time I was such a kid, and I was like, oh my God, Dracula, the werewolf, and Frankenstein are in this movie. This is so cool. And there was another one that they did called Hold That Ghost. And I grew up watching that 1,000 times over, and that was hilarious too. And again, being scared and being laughing, it just creates that that visceral reaction in people. It's just so much fun. It's a fun thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's all I have for you tonight. So, are you working on anything? Is Chloe working on anything coming up soon, or is that still in the works right now?
She just wrapped up a school play.
Okay. Did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
So
who'd you play?
It was at the school.
No, who did you play?
Oh, I was Mike TV's mom. I was Miss TV.
Oh, okay.
And we just finished that play up. We wrapped it up about, I would say, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But I don't have anything going on, but I would really like to do something again.
Yeah, and as far as me is concerned, like I said, we're exploring some ideas right now. We just have to see what idea we like the most, and also what idea is feasible. Because I'm not Marvel Studios, so I can't just fund anything that comes into my brain. So, but actually, before we go, I do have a question for you that I like to ask everybody. It's a two-part question. What was your favorite part of Mr. Sandman, and why?
Oh, well, she kind of gave it away when she started levitating. That was a really creepy thing that brought back vibes from, granted, not quite the same type of scene, but it just reminded me a little bit of The Exorcist. Granted, she wasn't being possessed, but it brought back those vibes. And that's always one of the big fear I think everyone has is losing control of yourself, where you can't stop anything. So something like that. And I'm kind of like you, I'm kind of desensitized most of the time, but we talk, when it's in the lens of a child, that kind of brings you back to that moment. And I remember having dreams too when I was a kid of you get those dreams that you're falling, but I did used to have dreams where I was being raised up over a bed. So that was one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was, I wouldn't say it scared me, but was certainly in awe of, and very okay. You almost got me there. That's a lot more than most people. So that's
Okay.
that would be my scene there.
Okay, very cool. I do enjoy hearing people's different answers, because I like to see, like, it's another thing that I love about movies, is just getting, like, two people could watch the same movie, and one person can have something, like you said, where you had dreams about that, that it affected you more than the other parts of the film, whereas other people point to something else, because it affected them in a personal way. So it's really cool to me.
Oh yeah, it's like oftentimes on the channel I'll have panel discussions, and sometimes we'll be tackling a full movie franchise. And my quick tag next week we'll be doing Nightmare on Elm Street, that whole franchise. But it's fun when you have a group about 3 or 4 of us talking about these movies, and when we start hitting the movies that start getting a little bit more divisive, or you have that one dissenting opinion, as we did with especially the Halloween franchise is definitely one, when, especially as you get past, I would say, part 4, that's where the opinions can start varying on each of those movies. So it's always fun to listen. What, you actually liked Halloween Ends? Something like that.
I could see where those debates are quite fun. I could see that.
They are, and I actually enjoy it, just because I'm always fascinated when someone likes a movie that everyone didn't like, or vice versa. And I had a little bit of a discussion with someone on that a few weeks ago. It's always kind of interesting to talk about. So, because if we all had the same opinions, it'd be boring. So,
I'm like that with Blair Witch Project. A lot of people didn't like it, and I actually enjoyed it, because I could totally, when I first saw it, I could totally see me and my friends, my group of friends at the time, doing something like that. So I'm like, I understand what people don't like, but I totally relate to this. So,
oh yeah, trust me, there's some Rob Zombie films that I like that I can understand why people don't like them, but they, for one reason or another, worked for me on some level. So, yeah, that's the amazing thing. Like we said, with all the different subgenres, you're going to find something that you like, and you might even find something maybe you don't particularly care much for, but that's the great thing about horror. So, Matt, Chloe, thanks for coming on tonight. And you're doing a terrific job. I hope you keep up the work, both of you. I expect to see you guys do a movie for A24 here within the next 10 years, maybe. And
from your lips to God's ears.
He doesn't listen very often, so I don't know. But
Okay,
I'll try.
I'll take it.
Okay, then. Well, you guys have a fabulous night. Great rest of your weekend. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And check out Matt's movie. It's Mr. Sandman. You can stream it over on TUBI, or you can also find it, if you also want to, you can also rent it on Prime Video, I believe. Either way. So yeah, and that's just so people know that was released in 2024, because I think there's like another movie called Mr. Sandman. So it's the one 2024. It's about, what is it, 40 minutes, I think, if I remember correctly, about 35, 40 minutes. So
yeah, with the post credits interviews, it's about 45 minutes.
All right then. Okay, well, you guys have a great rest of your night, and thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye, everyone.